So recently, I've become more interested in, uh, becoming more aware and having a greater understanding of my, you know, more local politics because I'm a huge like politics junkie in general, and I feel like very aware of say American politics, even like national Canadian politics, and starting to get more of like a limited a somewhat limited, but like more of an understanding of Ontario politics, which is can be fairly difficult, and to even like find books about say like political history or anything other than like a couple biographies of like some uh, a couple premiers, um, and let alone becoming more finding things to read or to become more aware of say local politics or history or anything. But so I have been reading this interesting book by the Queen's University Press called Democracy in Kingston, which is about the sort of like progressive reform social movements in the 1960s in the city as part of the sort of wider New Left movement that was seen in Canada, in the U.S. And which I've kind of only just started, but I am finding it very interesting, and I was particularly interested in it's not even that big a passage, but where they have this one line where they say. The New Left came to play a large part in Kingston politics as they did perhaps in any other Canadian city. From nowhere, the NDP built up a strong local presence, which I found interesting, or that kind of intrigued me because I know that recently from my perspective, recently in I guess Kingston politics, the NDP has become more of this. Force to be reckoned with. Like in 2018, we elected an NDP MPP, which I remember like because I was living in Toronto at the time when I was attending school. But I remembered that feeling like this crazy huge thing, like a big sign of okay, whoa, things are kind of changing in Ontario at this point, because like the idea of someone who's not a liberal winning in Kingston, which like for the whole time I've lived here, it's always been the liberal stronghold, like one of the safest liberal ridings in Ontario, in Canada. The idea that even a bland liberal like the MP we had at the time would lose to the NDP seemed crazy. And because also that was at the same time when I was living in Toronto, where there was also a crazy safe liberal riding, like where they always have like a minister or something of I think it was the health minister was the MPP at that time, but who got replaced by Jill Andrews, who's actually turned out to be a pretty great NDP MPP. But so so this line had me thinking, okay, so was this like the genesis that leads to eventually them building up enough to elect an MPP in 2018, right? Is this because we says okay, came out of nowhere, so like did the NDP CCF like not really exist or like barely exist in Kingston politics until this point in the 60s, and that's where established the foothold that leads to it being to where it is now, where like I feel like realistically, like when say Mark Erickson's thinking about things, or like when the provincial liberals here are thinking like the real threat to unseating Ted Hsu or Mark Erickson isn't really coming from the Conservatives, it's coming from the NDP. That's what they would worry about. So I thought to look up, okay, well, what have been the election results, right? Like, okay, is this when they say okay they established this presence, was that just people doing things on the ground, or like what was that actually having some effect on the federal or provincial election results. So I looked through the federal results, which is little bit just slightly challenging because before 1966, Kingston and the Islands was a different riding. It was just Kingston, so you got to find that other page first, which is slightly more difficult to find. But so in 1963, so a year before this movement, at least as it's outlined in the book, officially begins, the NDP had got 2,000 votes. In 1965, they got 3,000. And then in 1968, so the first post new district election, they got 4,000, meaning 14% of the vote there, and then they increased that to 5,000 in the 1972 elections, the first one after the end of this movement. And like, okay, that's like, that's decent growth, right? Like that's okay, but like I wouldn't characterize that as okay. The party basically came out of nowhere, right? But then that had me thinking, okay, maybe that's referring more to like the provincial, and still like you could get those votes like as a reflection of what's happening nationally, right? Hey, you like Tommy Douglas, vote for the NDP guy. That doesn't necessarily mean there was that much of like an active local party before then. And of course you do see them increasing more and more. And I think by the time, right? Yeah, like there's but a point like by the 80s, they're basically the NDP is basically getting uh like 20% of about 20% of the vote almost every election. Um, but so I thought, okay, let me check the provincial results, which is where I hit in my first snag, because the provincial results, again, the district, provincial, federal, both, is created in 1966, but the earliest results I can find for the Kingston and the Islands is in 1975, where they did get a pretty decent outcome, 24%. Even though the conservatives at that, because there's this long like conservative dominance in Ontario politics, the conservatives were winning for like this whole like for 100 years or for almost 100 years or something. But so okay, then I go, okay, well maybe that's on the other page, maybe that's on the Kingston page. And it is not, right? There are no election results whatsoever, right? It's just showing you members of provincial parliament, which, like I said, is basically just all conservative. So it's just showing you, oh yeah, they had a conservative, and then a conservative, and then a conservative, and then a conservative, but no information of what were the vote totals. So then I looked, okay, well, what's on the Elections Ontario page? And there is also nothing, right? I actually was, I thought I'd found it, and I found, okay, election results, Kingston, and was typing them down until I realized, well, that totals to 120%. And then I figured out, okay, they don't have any data. They're just showing me like what the provincial wide results were. But so like, yeah, as far as I can tell, and I've checked a bunch of different sources, there are like no records on Kingston provincial election results before 1975. So for like the entire first like 110 year history, or 108 history of that electoral district. Like it's, I don't know, that feels kind of like, I guess, do I just take, I guess I can just I'll just have to take his word for it that, like, yeah, this didn't really exist before that assuming he's maybe referring more to the provincial party, that didn't really exist before 1970 or before 1965.